Why do I say that some non-dual teachings are cruel? Well, listen to what they're saying. First of all, they say, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. This means that everything you experience is an illusion. In fact, your existence is an illusion, your sense of self is an illusion. You don't actually exist. Yet, what's the purpose of life, according to some of these teachings? Well, it's to be happy, because happiness is your essential nature. So, this is cruel because it ignores one of the most fundamental needs that we human beings have. We are not just human beings, we are psychological beings, we are spiritual beings, and we have certain psycho-spiritual needs. And one of the deepest needs that we have is for a sense of purpose. Now, I know that you can look at many people in the world who either have no sense of purpose, or their sense of purpose is entirely related to the material world, acquiring more and more possessions. But when you awaken to the reality that there's a spiritual side to life, there's a spiritual path we can follow, then the need to have a higher purpose becomes very important in your mind. So I have had this all of my life. I know many people who were born with this because we acquired this level of consciousness in previous lifetimes, where we need to have a sense of purpose, we need to understand what the purpose of life is, why we are here. And here comes these non-dual teachings, and they're saying there is no purpose. Because how can there be a purpose when the world is an illusion? If nothing in the world is real, how can there be a purpose to your existence? Some of these teachings make it sound like you are a separate self. And the only alternative to the separate self is Brahman or infinite awareness. So supposedly, you are, in order to become enlightened, you are supposed to awaken from the illusion that you exist as a separate self. And then you merge back into infinite awareness and cease to exist. Because if you are merging back into infinite awareness, there cannot be a self. There cannot be a self that experiences that it's infinite awareness. Because there's either infinite awareness or a separate self. That's what they say. So what they're really saying is that the purpose of existence is to achieve non-existence. The reason why you were created by Brahman, or that you came about as some kind of accident, I'm not really sure how they explain your existence, but the reason you exist is to achieve the awareness, the recognition that you don't exist. And I'm listening to this and I'm saying, does this actually motivate anybody? Because it doesn't motivate me. I mean, I can't make any sense out of it. So what it all boils down to is this. If life has any kind of purpose, there must be something that's real. If the world is entirely an illusion, life cannot have any kind of purpose. Then what's the purpose of the spiritual path? Of seeking to raise your awareness, of seeking to awaken. So let's examine this. Let's take a closer look at this. So I recently watched a video with one of these non-dual teachers. And he made the statement, the ultimate truth is that everything you experience is an appearance, an illusion. Now when I hear something like this, my mind just takes 3 steps back. And I say, do you not hear the contradiction in what you're saying? Can you really not see that this statement is contradicting itself? In one sentence, you're contradicting yourself. Because if everything is an illusion, how do you know that this ultimate truth that you claim to see isn't also just an illusion? Look at the world today, look at the world historically. Any number of individuals, any number of groups of people have claimed they had the ultimate truth. The fundamentalist Christians, the Romans, the Marxists, the materialists, the Muslims, the Hindus. So many people claim we have the ultimate truth. And here's this person saying on the one hand, everything we experience is an appearance. But apparently he thinks he is an exception to this because there is one thing that he sees that isn't an appearance, and that is that there's an ultimate truth. And that ultimate truth is that everything everybody else sees is an illusion. Well, isn't that the same that they've all been saying throughout history? So what I'm saying here, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't on the one side have there is an ultimate truth, and on the other side everything we see is an appearance. Because if everything is an appearance, there cannot be an ultimate truth. And if there is an ultimate truth, we need to explain how it's possible for us to recognize that ultimate truth when supposedly everything we see is an experience, is an appearance. So explain this to me, please, because I can't see the explanation. What I can do is I can come up with an alternative view. And that alternative view is, for us human beings on earth, there is no ultimate truth that we will ever be able to recognize here on earth. Yet at the same time, not everything we experience is an illusion. At least we have the potential to overcome illusion and experience something that is real. Now, why do I say this? Okay, take another statement. You are a separate self, supposedly. And that separate self is an illusion. You can come to realize that you are an illusion, and then you become awakened, enlightened. And as I've said before, I have not found any explanation of what these people think happens to you once you become awakened. Because it seems to me that if there's only the separate self and infinite awareness, awakening means you stop identifying yourself as a separate self, you go back into infinite awareness, and that means you as a self cease to exist, because there can't be a self in infinite awareness. There's only infinite awareness. Right? So to me, it seems like what they're saying is all or nothing. And what I'm saying is, explain to me one thing. If I am a separate self that is entirely an illusion, how can an illusion come to realize that it's an illusion? How can that which is unreal come to see that it's unreal? Because the separate self, everything the separate self sees is an illusion. How is it going to come to see that not only is everything an illusion, but it itself is an illusion? How do you come to this awareness if you are a separate self? What I'm saying is, if you are a separate self, all you can see is yourself as a separate being. You cannot come to see that separateness is an illusion from the separate self. And what does that mean? Well, go back thousands of years. They have talked about there's a path that leads to awakening or enlightenment, whatever you call the goal. The Buddha talked about it, the Hindu seers talked about it. There is a path that leads to awakening. But here comes these modern non-dual teachers, and they have taken the linear Western mindset and said, well, it's either or. Either there's a self or there's no self. And therefore, the self must be unreal, and only the infinite, undifferentiated, formless self is real, Brahman, or the Atman, or the one mind, whatever they call it. And what I'm saying is very simply, if there's any meaning to talking about a process, a path, there must be something in you that is real. Because only that which is real can recognize reality. That which is unreal, the separate self, cannot recognize reality. It can only see illusion. So what I'm saying is, instead of saying there's only the separate self and infinite awareness, there's a middle way. And the middle way is what I have talked about in other videos, that the core of our being is what I call the conscious you or the conscious self. And this self is real. Now I'll explain why it's real and where it came from, but the important thing for right now is this self is real. And it can recognize both something that's real and something that's unreal. In other words, the conscious you can make a distinction, a discernment between what is unreal and what is real. So in other words, in my model of the world that I received from the Ascended Masters, there are many more nuances than just separate self and infinite awareness. There is a separate self. This is what we have created. I've explained that we created it partly to take embodiment in this sphere that we live in, this world of form that we live in. But I've also explained that we actually start our existence at a certain level of consciousness, and we can go up towards higher levels of consciousness, or we can go down towards lower levels of consciousness. And we go down by going into what I call the consciousness of separation. And in separation, we are creating not only one separate self, we're creating many separate selves to respond to different situations. And we create these selves based on the duality consciousness. And this is why I've said over and over and over again, if you want to understand non-duality, you have to start by understanding the duality consciousness. Because in the duality consciousness, as I've explained, everything we create is an illusion, an appearance. And so it's true that when you are looking at the world through the separate selves, through the perception filter of the separate selves that color everything, then everything you see is an illusion, an appearance. That is correct. That I agree with. However, the conscious you has created the separate selves, but it hasn't become the separate selves, which means the conscious you can never lose its ability to step outside the separate selves and experience something that isn't filtered through the separate selves, that isn't colored by them. And this is what, since time immemorial, has been called a mystical experience, an intuitive experience, a non-dual experience. We can have an experience, and basically the experience is this. There's something outside our normal state of mind. There's something outside our normal perception filter, our normal worldview, the way we look at the world. And that something is more real than what we experience from inside these separate selves. That's the core of a mystical experience. And that experience is possible only because there is a self that is real. It has reality. Okay, so now we are entering this quagmire of debating, well, what is reality and what is unreality? And I've spent quite a lot of time in my life reading books on philosophy. Basically all the philosophers, from the Greek philosophers to the modern philosophers. I haven't read all their original works, but I've read a lot about them and their thoughts. And what you can see is that philosophers had debated back and forth about this issue. What is real and how can we know what's real? So the conclusion I've come to after all of these years of study is that we can't know what's real and unreal through the rational, linear mind. And this, of course, is the mind that has become so prominent in modern culture, modern materialistic culture. We think we can reason, we can rationalize about everything. And I'm not saying that this isn't a valuable aspect of the mind. Obviously, we can rationalize about a lot of things, especially about the material world and how the material world works. But the problem comes in when we start rationalizing up towards what is beyond the material world. That's where we need intuition and intuitive experiences. So to me, it's this. When you look at the world, when you look at philosophers, scientists, theologians, all of these people, modern day spiritual teachers, non-dual teachers, you can see very simply, when we're using the rational mind, the linear analytical mind, one person can come up with an argument that says, this is real. Another person can come up with an argument saying, this is unreal. Or one person argues, there is something that's real, and another argues, there is nothing that's real. And they are both convinced that their argument is right. And that's why I came to the conclusion that this kind of mind will never tell us what's real, because you can argue back and forth and never come to any real conclusion there. And as I've explained in some of my other videos, that's actually a feature of the duality consciousness. And so let me just briefly explain this from a different perspective. I have in a couple of videos talked about that you can look at the material world as a kind of reality simulator. And so it's a device. And it's created for the purpose of giving us experiences and making those experiences seem real. Because that's the only way we really have an experience is that we think it's real. So in other words, the vast majority of people on Earth are convinced that they live in a real world. That is, not only that, but they are convinced that the world is the way they see it. That's why you have all of these ideologies, religions, philosophies that are creating a theoretical framework that says this is how the world should work, and then people do everything they can to try and make the world, to force the world to work the way they think it should work. And of course, the world stubbornly refuses to work according to human theory. So they all ending up getting frustrated. And that's why they go to war with each other, each one saying that if only everybody agreed with us, then the world would work the way we say it should work. That's why you have warfare and conflict. So this is part of what the reality simulator is designed to do. In other words, give people the experience that they are living in a real world and that the world is the way they see it. So this is what I call the immersion experience. People are completely immersed in what they think is a real world. But there are two types of experiences that a reality simulator is designed to facilitate. One is the immersion experience, the other is the awakening experience, where you awaken and begin to realize that you're in a simulator. And how do you realize this? Well, when you're in immersion, you think there's a real world that you haven't created. And the real world doesn't respond to your consciousness. You can see how religious people for thousands of years said, God created the world, and God is beyond the world, and God has designed the world the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it. We can pray to God, and maybe He'll make a few exceptions, but by and large, the world is the way God created it. Then there's the materialists who say the world functions according to laws of nature, and there's nothing we can do about it. So this is the immersion experience. You think there's an outside world that is affecting you, and you think that your reaction to the world is the only way to react to the world, because that's how the world is. When you start to awaken, the first thing you do is to start questioning, is my reaction to the world really the only possible reaction? Is it possible to have a different kind of reaction than I've had so far? Is it possible to look at the world a different way than the way I was brought up to look at the world? So then you start questioning this. And eventually you come to the point where you can start questioning what I've called your perception filter. Is the way I look at the world really the only way? Is it the ultimate way? Is there a higher way to look at the world? And that's when you become open to not only having mystical experiences, but also becoming more and more aware that these mystical experiences are an alternative, a frame of reference compared to your normal state of consciousness. In other words, you realize there's a higher state of consciousness than what I have right now. And in that higher state of consciousness, I will see that many of the things I believe right now, many of the things I take for granted, are actually illusions. So what I'm saying is, once you start the awakening process, you engage in this gradual process, gradual path, where you come to see through many of the things that you think are real, but that are actually illusions. And how do you see through an illusion? Only by seeing that there's a higher reality, there's a higher view than the illusion. How do you realize that the world is not flat? By recognizing that the world is round. So you are replacing an illusion with a higher view. Now, it doesn't mean it's the ultimate view. There could be still higher views to have. But at least you are engaging in a path where you are gradually shedding illusions and acquiring more and more contact with more and more experience of a reality that isn't created by these separate selves, that isn't colored by the separate selves. So, in other words, you have some people out there who are saying, oh, the world doesn't exist, it's all created in our minds. And this, I just can't find it credible. I mean, sorry, here I am. My hand is here. Should I raise my hand or should I not raise my hand? Well, if I consider this question, I have immediately, and just look at the universe, how big it is, billions of galaxies, reaching further and further out than light can travel in the existence of the universe. This enormous universe, when I consider should I raise my hand or not, I split this enormous universe into two versions. And in one, I am not raising my hand, and in another, I am raising my hand. When you started watching this video, you split the universe into two. One where you're watching the video, one where you're not watching the video. If you decide, oh, I don't agree with what he's saying, you split the universe into two, one in which you agree with me and one in which you don't agree with me. So, doesn't really make sense. So what I'm saying is, the alternative is to realize that when we go into this state of separation, we use the duality consciousness to create an appearance of the world, of what the world is like. In other words, this is how we become immersed in the reality simulator and think it's a real world. When we start to awaken from immersion, we begin to question all of these illusions that we use to create our worldview. And this means we become more and more in touch with the fact that there is something outside our own minds. There's something outside our perception filter. There's a different way to look at the world. But we can also come to a point where we start realizing, what if I'm inside this device called a reality simulator? This, incidentally, doesn't mean that everything inside the simulator is an illusion. Again, only everything seen from inside the state of separation is an illusion. Because even in the simulator, there are certain things that are real because somebody designed the simulator to work the way it does. So in other words, it's really, at least at a certain stage of the spiritual path, it's not really that constructive to think about, is the world real? Is the earth real? Is there actually a planet? Because what is more constructive is to realize, okay, I'm in a reality simulator and I'm in the process of awakening because I've already come to question many illusions. But how do I go further? By questioning more illusions. But the illusions I need to question are the ones inside of my own mind. And I also need to investigate then, how does the simulator actually work? And why am I in this simulator? Why was the simulator created in the first place? And so there There are various purposes for the creation of a simulator, but the primary one is to give us experiences. So what we realize is that we can have any experience we want in a simulator called Earth, at least within very wide boundaries. But what determines the experience we're having? It's our state of mind. The simulator has a certain programming. But within that programming, we human beings can do many things, can change many things. And as I've explained in some of my other videos, we have already changed a lot on Earth. We have densified matter. We have created a state of lack and poverty, which are not what the simulator was originally programmed with. But what it means for you individually is that you're in the simulator because your higher self chose to send you, the conscious you, into embodiment. And it did this because your higher self wants to have certain experiences in the simulator. And so it isn't the purpose of life to get out of here as quickly as possible. The purpose of life, at least at a certain level, is to have the kind of experiences that your higher self wants in the simulator and that you, as the conscious you, want to have in the simulator. And so the reality, the realization you can come to is you, as the conscious you, you're not actually experiencing conditions on Earth. I have said in other videos that the conscious you is pure awareness. But what that really means is that the conscious you is not judging, is not evaluating everything that happens to you. When you have a certain experience, the conscious you is not constantly sitting there judging. Is this right or wrong? Is this good or bad? Should this have happened? Shouldn't it have happened? The conscious you isn't suffering from Earth. The conscious you isn't reacting to Earth. Your view of life on Earth, your reaction to life on Earth, comes through these separate selves that you have created in your subconscious mind. That's where the reaction is. And that's why you can come to this realization that, okay, I'm in a reality simulator. And there is an environment that was created for me. It was created by beings who have a higher level of awareness than I do. They created the simulator and the programming. But my personal experience inside the simulator is determined by the contents of my subconscious mind, my emotional mind, my mental mind, my identity mind. How I see myself, what I think I can and can't do, how I think I have to feel about life on Earth. These are all separate selves. And if I, as the conscious you, become aware, I don't actually like my life experience. I want to raise my life experience to a higher level. Then the way to do this is to look at these subconscious selves, pull them into conscious awareness, see that they are based on a certain decision that was based on an illusion, and say, this is not the only way I can react here. I can react differently. I don't need this self. I don't want this self anymore. I'm letting it go. I'm letting it die. I'm surrendering it. I'm refusing to feed my attention and energy into it. And this is the process you can engage in. And every time you let go of one of these separate selves, you shed an illusion and you become more free. And you become more in touch with what's real. So in other words, we are in a reality simulator, yes. But there is a certain reality to the simulator and how it works. And your state of mind determines what the simulator sends back to you and how you experience the simulator. And therefore, the first thing you do, you start working with your own state of mind, get rid of these separate selves so that you are sending a different message into the cosmic mirror, but you're also reacting differently to the conditions around you. Because you realize one thing very simply, you're not the only person in the simulator. There are 7-8 billion other persons here. They're also projecting something. So you can't expect that the simulator is going to completely conform to your state of mind. This means you will always be confronted with conditions that you need to react to. So the question is, how do you react to these conditions? Do you react through these separate selves, which causes you suffering? Or do you react as a conscious you who says, I don't need to react to this. Why should I react to this? I have a right not to react. you'll see that one of the very common reactions you get is that you meet somebody who has a very strong opinion about something, and he absolutely or she absolutely wants you to convince you to share that opinion. And they are trying to make you feel obligated to respond to this. But you have a right to say, I don't want to respond. I have no response to this. But you can't do that as long as you have these separate selves, because they will pull you into reacting. But when you get rid of the separate selves, you are free not to react. And that's when you can come to a point where, first of all, you can decide what kind of life experience do you want in the simulator. And then after you have learned, you have mastered how the simulator works, then you can come to a point where you can graduate from the simulator and you can say, okay, I no longer want to be in the simulator called Earth. I want to go to another kind of simulator. And there are even some people who have reached a level of consciousness in past lifetimes where in this lifetime they can not only say I want to go to a different simulator that is higher than Earth, they can say I want to ascend from the level of simulation. I do no longer want to be in this world where there's a simulation. I want to ascend to the ascended realm, to the spiritual realm, and become an ascended master. So these are options you have. So let's put it this way. When we are deep in separation, when we are immersed, everything we see is an illusion, yes. And the reason for this is that we still have a conscious you, which is real. But the conscious you is experiencing the world and itself through all of these separate selves in the identity, mental, and emotional minds. And they color what you see, and you don't think there's an alternative. So the start of the awakening process is that you come to realize, oh, there is something outside my own mind. The contents of my own mind, I can't fully trust them. My mind is actually distorting my experience of life. And so you start questioning these illusions. And when you start shedding these separate selves, there will come a point where spontaneously what will happen is the conscious you steps outside. Maybe just for a moment, maybe just for a split second, but you experience something that was outside of your normal state of mind, and it's so real that you can't deny it. And that's why I'm saying the entire concept that only Brahman is real and the world is an illusion is, first of all, it's out of touch with reality. But second of all, it's not constructive for your spiritual growth. It's actually dangerous for your spiritual growth because it can take you into this blind alley where you sit there, oh, nothing is real, everything is an appearance, everything is an illusion. And what I'm saying is that the middle way here is to recognize there is a part of you that is real. That is the conscious self. And the conscious self can experience a reality outside your mind. And that is real compared to the contents of your mind. It may not be ultimately real, which I'll discuss in a few minutes, but it's real compared to the illusions that you normally see the world through. And that means that once you have that experience, you have a frame of reference that allows you to start consciously questioning the illusions. And that means you may have been making progress before without really being consciously aware of what you were doing. But once you realize this consciously, you can make a lot more progress, a lot faster progress, because now you can start saying, okay, why am I reacting this way? There must be a separate self that's causing me to react. And at the core of that separate self is an illusion. What is that illusion? Let me come to see it. And when you come to see it, you can let the separate self die. And now there's less of a magnetic pull that pulls the conscious you into identifying with these separate selves. So you can start relating to the world, not through these separate selves. And eventually what happens is that when you go through this process, you begin to realize that the conscious you is not the only part of your being. You actually have a higher self. It's often called the I am presence, but we can call it the spiritual self or the higher self. And that's who you really are. because the conscious you is just an extension of the spiritual self, the higher self. Because the spiritual self, which resides in the lower spiritual realm, decided that it wanted to experience what it was like in this unascended sphere. And if you're not familiar with the concept of an unascended sphere, I have a video called How the World Was Created, where I explain the difference between an ascended sphere and an unascended sphere. And it's actually very profound. It was tremendously helpful for me to have this teaching. So, your I am presence, your higher self, decided it wanted to experience this, and in order to grow, in order to expand its sense of self, its awareness. And so the really important point here to get, that is really the alternative to these non-dual teachings, is that the purpose of life is not to attain non-existence. The purpose of life is to attain a higher form of existence. The purpose of life is not to attain a state of no self, but to attain a higher sense of self. Because you are created as an individual self in order to expand your sense of self, and you can eventually reach the creator consciousness, the highest level of consciousness possible in our world of form. And then you can decide what you want to do from there. You have different options that I'm not going to go into here because it's a distraction from what I want to talk about. But the reality here is that the purpose of life is self-transcendence, not self-annihilation. And if you look at these non-dual teachings, the consequence of these teachings is the purpose of life is self-annihilation. And first of all, I'm saying, does this really motivate anybody? But second of all, I'm saying, how is this even possible? How can a self that sees itself as a separate being ever come to realize that it's not a separate being? How can an illusion come to see that it's an illusion? There has to be something real for there to be any purpose to life or any purpose to the concept of a spiritual path, which has been around for a very long time. As I said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't at the one side say the world and everything you see is an appearance, but there is an ultimate truth, namely that everything you see is an appearance. Because if everything you see is an appearance, then that, what you call the ultimate truth, how is that not an appearance? How are you seeing it if it's not an appearance? And what in you is seeing it? Because how can the separate self see an ultimate truth? Only a self that's real can see what's real. And it's not an ultimate truth because, as I said, there is no ultimate truth on earth that we can see on earth. We have to ascend before we can see a higher truth. But really, we have to reach the greater consciousness before we'll see some ultimate truth. So that's a long ways off. So it's an illusion to think that we human beings here on earth could reach some ultimate state of consciousness. I don't care what they say about the Buddha, Jesus, Ramana Maharshi, this or that teacher. Nobody who has been in a physical body on earth has ever reached the ultimate state of consciousness. This is just pride. And it is very, very constructive for us to realize this while we are still in embodiment. There is no final destination here. We are passing through. The purpose of being an embodiment on a low planet like Earth, an unnatural planet like Earth, is to transcend our state of consciousness so that we can ultimately graduate from the reality simulator of Earth and become an ascended master by mastering our own minds. That's a purpose that I can log into. Perhaps you can too.